So hi everyone, great to be here today. Today we're going to talk about Trendspotting and sports content in 2025 and beyond. So specifically, we're going to talk about sports in terms of efficiency and how efficiency is very much the future going forward. So to begin with, I think before we can look to the future, we need to look back, and especially around what we talked about last year. So last year at this event, we talked about how sports viewing is increasingly moving online, which definitely still stands today. Secondly, we talked about how the shift online is impacting sports production. And thirdly, we talked about how new tech is still very much experimental. So to see kind of where we stand around that today, firstly, we're going to talk about how online viewing has put sports on more vendors' radar, which I think is something that everyone here in the audience has definitely been seeing over the past year. Secondly, we'll talk about how budget pressures have actually meant that the tech that's being invested in the most over the past year has been efficiency technology that either makes money or saves money, and we'll look specifically at those types of technology as well. And then finally, we'll go back to those experimental trends that we talked to last year, like generative AI, cloud live production, XR, and gamification, and we'll look at how those need to kind of be really driving efficiency in order to find their budgets. So starting with, online has put sports on more vendors' radars. So to begin with, what we see is that the amount of technology and the range of technology that sports rights owners are buying has expanded significantly. So sports rights owners, in this case, we're talking specifically about the leagues themselves as opposed to the broadcasters who are buying those rights. Now, what we've seen is that as opposed to just buying live production rights or just buying kind of certain specific OVP rights to kind of stream that content, that's expanded across a lot of different segments, including kind of broadcast and professional, live production, all the way through to content security. And we expect that to continue growing because of the fact that online is introducing platforms for this long tail of sports. So while the market size across sports rights is still very much dominated by soccer or football, depending which accent I pick today, basketball, and also kind of across rugby, there's still over 30% within that long tail of niche sports which need their content to be shown. And we find that they're specifically doing that online because broadcasters might not necessarily be purchasing those niche rights, which is why the kind of purchase of tech has expanded as well. At the same time, we see that direct-to-fan experience is growing, with over 55% of rights holders now having their own streaming services. Now, this is important because while some rights are using it to kind of live stream their event overall, the majority of them are using it for supplementary content, whether that be reserve team games or kind of fan engagement to understand kind of what's going on with player interviews and really build that connection, which has been super impactful for also bringing audiences from different kind of platforms. So bringing in people from social media, specifically Gen Z, it's a good way to engage them, and we've really seen that up in direct-to-fan over the past year, and we expect to continue seeing that as well. Now all of these things together are driving up the total spend on media tech, sports media tech specifically. And we've seen that while there's going to be a large amount of growth kind of overall, we're looking at around 70% from 2018 through to 2028. From now until 2028, we're only going to see around 24% more growth. Now, this is great because obviously the industry is still growing, but we can't ignore the elephant in the room, which is that budgets are tight and spend overall is not going to be growing at that same rate. So drives us to our next point, which is that because of these budget pressures, tech either needs to save money or make money. So if we look at the segments across all of media tech that have seen the most growth over the last year, and I'll break these down, we see that they're ones that are driving efficiency. And you can kind of see these growth rates, and if we then jump into which ones have been kind of saving money, what we can see is that archive, offline, and nearline storage have grown significantly, because you can't do anything with your content. You can't do all these exciting, shiny things unless your content's organized. So we've seen huge growth in that, and that saves them money because they're not spending the time trying to find where different things are. Secondly, we see that virtual sets have gone up significantly, and that's because it's cheaper, and they're smaller, and it means that you don't have to build a new set every time you go somewhere. So for that reason, the studios can also be smaller. So once again, kind of driving that efficiency and saving money from that perspective. And then finally, CDN monitoring and switching is saving money because people having multiple CDNs, specifically from the buy side, helps them to optimize consumer QOCs and also optimize costs. So it's been really kind of these segments that have been driving the saving money side of things. If we look to the other side in terms of segments that are making money, what we see is that the segments that are growing the faster are sports data tools, and this specifically relates to that long tail opportunity that we spoke about in terms of having sports tools with that specific production grammar for that sport, because that will allow new niche content types to be created, therefore bringing different revenue options in because there's new content types, which is what we're always on the hunt for. Secondly, cloud and software live production has definitely been growing significantly because it can help kind of with saving money, but also with making money in terms of those niche productions. But I think something super important to mention, and also following the panel that we had this morning, is that cloud live production also brings in opportunities for new talent. So it's much easier to train someone in production when you're not worrying about bringing someone who's brand new and doesn't have experience to a live game and paying the expenses for them to be there and doing all of that. When you're doing this kind of from a remote place, then people who might not have experience are able to be part of that event and present and learn through that experience without there being concerns about them kind of being brought into it. It also offers opportunities for people who might have different accessibility requirements, which is really important as we kind of expand the reach of who's within this industry, something that we're kind of definitely focusing on as we look towards the future in terms of who's going to be working in this industry. And then finally, what we've seen huge growth in is fan engagement tools, and that's because the fan engagement funnel offers direct new revenue streams. So whether that be at the top with kind of data coming in when you're watching games live, through to kind of fantasy sports leagues, and then through to betting, that's a direct revenue driver. So fan engagement is definitely a way that we've seen broadcasters and sports organizations themselves diversifying their portfolio in terms of that revenue and securing their position going forward, as opposed to just relying on kind of streams. So let's talk about these experimental trends that are really exciting and on everyone's mind and super shiny, but what's actually happening with them so far. So last year what we talked about was generative AI, cloud live production, personalization and gamification, and immersive experiences like XR, AR, and VR. So we'll start with generative AI because it's the topic of the year once again. So in terms of generative AI peak, the generative AI hype, the interesting thing is that it has actually peaked. We see that the news mentions that we've been tracking, specifically for the media tech segment, are starting to go down, which is usually a good sign that it's actually going to start being utilized a little bit more as opposed to just spoken about if we think about that kind of cycle of hype mentality. So we do see that trend happening, which leads us to believe there are going to be more live deployments. However, these deployments won't necessarily be super exciting. The deployments that we currently have seen from AI, and this is based on a survey that we did across the industry, is that they're being used for kind of everyday routine tasks to kind of support operational efficiency, as opposed to replacing anything creative or supporting on that side of things. And that's where we really see generative AI thriving and where there's going to be a big opportunity for making things faster as opposed to replacing someone's creative process altogether. Now, there are, of course, circumstances where there's going to be creative opportunities, and I think obviously grasp those as they come in. But as a vendor, I would definitely be focusing my attention in terms of how AI can support my clients with efficiency. And as a buyer, if your budgets are tight, then I'd definitely be looking to how this can support me in that as opposed to what new cool feature can I add, because the budgets are competing kind of for all of the different things, and efficiency is the first step so we can then move into the future. And this kind of efficiency is also going to support, once again, bringing on those new labor forces. Secondly, we'll look at cloud and software live production. So the growth of cloud and software live production is very much on the up. Between 2018 and 2028, we do expect to see 140% growth, and that's kind of a very big number. Once again, a lot of that jump has already happened. It will be stable going forward. But this growth is important for a number of reasons. As I mentioned, there's the opportunity for training people, there's the opportunity for niche sports productions, and then there's also just the opportunity to experiment a little bit more. There'll be some myths that I'm sure are going to be dispelled later, and I look forward to hearing that panel as well, because cloud live production definitely needs to be understood better by the industry in terms of what cloud actually means to everyone and how it's being utilized. But it's definitely on the up, and kind of utilizing it for the opportunities that exist is going to be more important than ever. And then finally, we have gamification, AR, XR. And the most important fact here is that these are predominantly about connecting to the fans, and specifically about connecting to fans that might not be within that linear television viewing circuit. So you're not necessarily aiming for kind of the millennial generation. You're looking at the Gen Zs and Generation Alpha who's coming next in terms of making sure that they're engaged not only on match day, but throughout, because they don't have this connection to sports that we've had in previous generations. So if we start by looking at gamification, what we can see is that it increases viewer engagement because it lets them have an active role in the game. This also directly leads into the sales funnel in terms of fan engagement. Secondly, it gives you interactivity through till games day. People aren't waiting for one match to be the kind of drawing you in and getting you involved in sports overall. You have this consistent, ongoing relationship, which is what's inevitably going to bring that fan back to the screen and back to the television screen in the longer term. Finally, thirdly, it drives betting, as I mentioned. That kind of direct engagement will lead into that sales funnel. And then finally, it allows you to collect new audience data. So even in the circumstances that that's not driving direct revenue, the opportunity that exists within gamification is, take part in this raffle, take part in this game, and give your details to us. And all of a sudden, you've started collecting data on new fan bases and the opportunities within that, which is beneficial for the broadcasters or the buyers of the sports because they have a new audience they can now reach out to and get involved with. If we look on the XR, AR, and kind of immersive experience side of things, we see that it provides very unique content, provides content that you can't access anywhere else just because of the nature of how you're going to be consuming it, whether that be on your phone at the game, giving you those additional layers, or through a headset. We see that we've seen different experiments being done in terms of players actually having cameras on them during different games. We've seen that at football matches, or also we've seen it through tunnels as they're kind of entering the game, and it provides this new experience and this closeness to the athletes, which we've been missing. However, and it does increase that personal connection. However, mobile first is still the predominant and kind of main opportunity within that because it's the most accessible. Not everyone has a headset at their home, which is kind of one of the biggest stopping points at the moment. So while XR and AR are going to be very impactful in the future in terms of driving connection to the sport, right now they are still very much experimental phase, and we haven't seen that same success that we've seen with kind of efficient generative AI and cloud live production so far. So if we kind of go back over what we've talked about today, what are some of the key takeaways? Firstly, vendors are working with sports organizations directly and the leagues themselves because of this direct-to-fan approach and the opportunity that exists for those clubs outside of just their rights. Secondly, while tech spend is set to grow, tight budgets mean that investment is really being prioritized in kind of technologies that are going to give you efficiency. Now, it's also important to note that technology is set to grow, but not at the same rate. So developing technology that aligns with this is super important. And then finally, new technology has found success where it directly impacts efficiency. So once again, that cloud live and generative AI is where it's really growing in that aspect. And until it can drive new revenues or save money, then it's not necessarily going to find its footing. So that's what we see as the most important growth sectors, and that's what we see going forward. From the buy side, make sure that you're focusing on what's going to streamline your organization. And from the vendor side, make sure you're not focusing on the really exciting new shiny things only. Make sure you're also looking at the opportunities to kind of help the buyers and support them in this tumultuous time that they're going through. That's everything from me. If you would like the deck, please feel free to scan and we'll send that over to you. Thank you, everyone.